Hello, everybody.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Genealogy Adventures.
I'm Danya.
I'm Brian. And as always, thank you for spending your Sunday with us.
Yes, yes.
So, today we have a topic that's already generating or has generated a lot of interest online.
Yes.
So, it is the question for the conversation: should descendants of African slaves basically pay to access genealogy databases and genealogical information?
Well, we kind of had a show like this, but it was with someone who started it. So I'm hoping that Carolyn is watching. And Brian actually had an experience with it. And now he's like, okay, now I get it. This is ridiculous. So we're really trying to, figure out, where you guys stand with that. Do you think or do you feel that this should happen in that way? And Carolyn, I hope that you're watching so that you can, chime in
Mm-hmm.
and give your 2 cents on this matter. So Brian, why don't you, explain to everybody
Okay.
what happened?
So again, hopefully this is going to be a really good conversation. So I hope people are coming with, questions and comments and responses to topics that we'll be covering. So the first thing I want to do is a bit of housekeeping. I can foresee some Me Tooism, especially with people watching this on the demand version, not necessarily live. So I just want to clarify a few things. First of all, I just want to say that enslaved Africans, their history is completely different than any other people in this country. And that is not dismissing the pain suffered by Native Americans, Norte Americanos throughout the southern states and the West Coast, Chinese in the 19th century, Japanese internments. I know a lot of people have suffered in this country over the centuries, but no one has had their identity stripped from them in the way that Africans had their identity stripped from them, even their names.
Not a soul.
So, yes, as I said, I can appreciate a lot of people have had some dark and awful histories in this country, but in
And this
this,
is not going against those histories,
no, it isn't.
The thing is that we have to acknowledge what we need to acknowledge. And the bottom line is that these things did happen at the times that these things happened. And some were worse than others, some were the same as others.
Mm-hmm.
So,
But again, maybe it's another show for another time, but it always seems as though when African Americans say, say what I just said, that we have a uniqueness in our history,
we're told
uh,
to forget about it.
or other people think as though we're taking it away from the pain that their ancestors suffered. I know the Irish suffered. I know the Italians suffered. I know the Portuguese and the Greeks suffered. But no one has suffered in quite the same way that Africans have.
I just need them to stop telling me to forget about it. I'm
Yeah.
I'm sorry about everybody's issues, and I'm sorry. Don't ask me to be sympathetic towards yours when you can't even be sympathetic towards mine. That is
Yeah.
my overall thing. I'm sympathetic to everything, but do not come to me and tell me to stop. Don't tell me to stop. Like that's another show. That's another
So
show.
probably the first 20 minutes of this show is really going to be kind of a general how you research your enslaved African ancestors. Because the only way that I could think of to even broach this topic is by Donnie and I talking about two projects. Well, one project that I'm working on, and then a project that we're both working on. So I'm going to start with the project, the Weeping Time. So to cut a very long historical episode short, the Weeping Time was one of the largest sales of enslaved African Americans in American history. 440 plus people were sold over 3 days at a racetrack in Savannah, Georgia, in 1859 uh, by their enslaver, Pierce Meese Butler, who was having some financial troubles. So, where to start with that? Because one of the reasons why I got involved is an Irish cousin, Martine Brennan, was working on this project as part of her MA thesis. She asked if I'd like to become a part of it. And as usual, ended up finding out that I'm shared DNA with descendants of the Weeping Time people. So somewhere in this history, Donnie and I both have at least one ancestor, but knowing us, probably more than one.
It's always more than one.
It's always more than one. So while the team has been working on this in two different ways. There's a group of people who are researching trying to find living descendants of the people who were sold during the weeping time. There's another group of us who are looking at the African origin story for their ancestors. So we're working from the past to the present and from the present to the past, and universe smiling upon us, some way, shape, or form we're going to meet in the middle. So I just want to give you a rough overview of kind of how this is all working. So to identify the actual first generation of enslaved Africans, we had to understand basically how they arrived here, who brought them here, when they were sold, who they were. And again, it's all through the Butler family. From Pierce Meese Butler, you go back to his grandfather, who was Major Pierce Butler, an Irishman who arrived in South Carolina and lived in Philadelphia, had loads of plantations, and very rarely actually stayed in any of them. But he basically enslaved hundreds and hundreds of people. Major Butler was also a slave importer with his wife's in-laws, who were the Izzard, Guerard, I'm forgetting one, Middleton family. So one of the enslaving partnerships was on his wife's side and involves a man called Colonel Thomas Middleton. And this is all deep in the colonial period. So Middleton went into business with a man called Samuel Braceford. And between them, there was something like they imported 37 different lots of Africans. It's believed that they imported anything from 4,000 to 8,000 Africans during their partnership, which lasted for about 11 years. So to start with, you have to identify the Middleton and Brailford ships that they owned that actually transported Africans across the Atlantic. And they did it in two ways, because of course it couldn't be straightforward. They either brought them straight from Africa to Charleston, South Carolina, or they went to Barbados first and either sold Africans there for provisions or for money, and then came to Charleston, South Carolina. So if you're going to be auctioning thousands of enslaved Africans, there has to be an auction. And if there's an auction, there's an advertisement. And I'm going to show you some examples of this in a couple of minutes. So out of the 30-something ships, I've already found about 12 to 15 of them, which is already totaling something like 2,000 enslaved Africans. So I have the names of the ships, I have the names of the captains, I have a rough idea of exactly how many Africans were actually transported on each one of those ships, and I actually have a sales date, and I have a sales location between Charleston and Beaufort, South Carolina. For any of you who've actually seen a slave ship manifest, they don't have names. It's not like indentured servants who signed a contract in Europe, were on a ship, and their name will appear on a ship passenger list or a manifest list. When you look at a slave ship's manifest, say for instance there was 300 slaves, it would say 100 men, 100 adult men, 100 adult women, and say 50 boys, 50 girls to make that the 300 people. There are no names. There are no ages. There's no indication of, they're not even listed individually. It is literally listed as groups of people.
So there's no country. You don't know where they came from.
You do in the advert. At least with Middleton and Brailsford, they actually tell you where the ship came from. And where
they tell you where the ship came from.
And they tell you where the Africans came from.
Okay.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
And each one of their adverts, and I'll show you an example in a minute. Oh, actually, Deezy, if you wouldn't mind, can you put up image number 1? And sorry, I'm not speaking to the ether. Deezy is our amazing producer.
Awesome producer.
So, and this just kind of, so hopefully you can see that pretty well on your screen. That kind of gives you the steps that I'm talking about. So from the advertisements, we're finding the enslaved people auction dates. Whenever you see the initials EP, that stands for enslaved people. Then the next thing is to find the actual sales ledgers for the EP auctions. Because what I'm thinking is, you have a ship of 350 enslaved Africans.
You gotta keep record of it.
Yeah, but if you're Middleton and Brailsford, you're not going to give them a name.
No.
Why? Are you serious? I can't seriously think that they're going to sit there and give people temporary names, knowing very well that the people who are going to buy them are just going to give them names themselves.
Right.
So why bother? So the next part, the really important part, is trying to find the actual sales ledgers for each one of the shipments of Africans that came over. And the reason why we need those is to figure out who bought what African,
Okay.
to be able to pick up the trail. And then, universe willing, God willing, that person's record still exists. So we can finally start picking up people's names.
Right.
So that's going to be another database. That's going to be another database to get. So already I've had to pay for a newspaper subscription for a colonial newspaper to get the names of the ships with the information that I need. Then paid another fee to be able to figure out what some of the auction dates were, because that was a completely different database. When it comes to the sales ledgers, now I've written to the South Carolina State Archives to very specific, talking about Middleton and Brailsford, to find out, have they ever heard of them? Do they exist? Do they have them? So I'm waiting to hear back about that. So that could either mean I'm going to have to take a trip to South Carolina. So that's a hotel, that's travel cost, that's food.
That's eating. Yes.
Yep, eating
That's
food.
getting back home.
Getting back home. So that's going to be more money. That's even if the ledgers have survived.
And if exactly, because what if it didn't?
Exactly.
What if it didn't?
So I can think for those of you.
Which is a huge possibility.
Huge pot. It is. You can't. Sherman went through Georgia. South Carolina and Georgia, and people, things
Right.
are getting burnt left, right, and center.
That's
so
right.
they may not survive.
That's right.
So for those of you who are really experienced in doing enslaved research, you're thinking, well, you can find deeds. Well, the deeds are going to be in private hands. Middleton and Brailsford wouldn't have kept copies of them. So they're either going to be in private collections, they're going to be in someone's attic. They may occasionally pop up for sale on an auction site like eBay.
Or worse, they're going to be somewhere where only certain people
We
can
can
look
get it.
at them.
Yep.
And that, to me, is just absolutely terrible. That's the worst thing.
Mhm.
They're going to say it's a part of a certain collection that's not ready yet, and you never see it because collection never gets ready. Yeah. I'm sorry.
And again, because they're in private hands, people may not even know the significance of the deed that they have. To them, it's just a slave deed.
Then there's a significance. And that's how I look at that. There's no way that you can look at a slave's deed and not think that there's a significance to it. So that's just them being. I'm sorry ahead of time. That's them being ignorant. But I mean, just bottom line, there's no way you can look at a slave deed and not think that it is not important.
Yeah.
It's impossible for you to do that.
Now, I want to see your face when I say the next bit. I've seen them on sale on eBay for like $350, $400.
So have I.
That's someone's family
That's
history.
somebody's family history that you're selling off to the highest bidder. No different than an auction in itself.
Yep.
It's still selling them. This is why I get so not angry. I don't get angry, but I do get annoyed. Can I say that? Okay, I get
You get annoyed.
I get annoyed, and it just doesn't make any sense for me that you cannot actually see that what you're doing to these people is the same thing that was done to them when they were alive. You're auctioning them off yet again.
Yep.
That's what's going on. So yeah, okay, keep going.
So there's that. So as I said, the next step is also trying to find the names, the estate records for the people who actually bought the Africans that were transported. Then you can actually start tracing the enslaved people once you have their names to try to find their descendants. So that's a whole other thing. Then we have, and in and amongst that, because again, just thinking logically and practically, Brailsford and Middleton would have kept enslaved people for themselves. They wouldn't have sold the entire shipment of Africans. They would have, they went to the expense of, they brought them here. They were enslavers. They had plantations all over South Carolina and Georgia. So you can't tell me that they wouldn't have taken, 50 or 60 for them each for themselves.
Right.
To bump up their numbers of enslaved people.
Exactly.
And then sell the rest.
Exactly.
So in and amongst this, we have to do a lot of research on Thomas Middleton, his entire family, Brailsford, his entire family, to figure out where these people are going. And for people who don't get the other part of the significance of this is the roots of the Gullah.
Right.
This is the roots of the Gullah Geechee people, at least in South Carolina. Then we have the fun of, between the beginning bit and the weeping time bit, there were two lots of enslaved Africans who actually went away with the British that were held by both the Middleton and the Brailsford family. So Revolutionary War, a whole group of them left with the British for Nova Scotia. War of 1812, again, a whole other lot went to Nova Scotia. We have to research them because there's no point trying to find descendants of people who were held by these South Carolina families who aren't here anymore. So they're still part of the story, but to reduce the number of people that we actually need to research, we need to filter those people out. So that's 2 more subscriptions to Canadian databases to try to figure out which one of Thomas Middleton's bunch of people left. So that's lots of fun too. And then trying to find the sales ledger for the weeping time. That's the last bit. So again, we don't know if those ledgers exist.
If they're in private hands or any of those things.
So again, written to the Savannah Historical Society, written to the the Georgia Historical Society and State Archives to see if they've even heard of them, if they have them, or where they are. So, sorry, DZ, if you can throw up the second image number 2. So this is one of the advertisements that I found. This was in a paper, I think this is 1753. This is the South Carolina Gazette. And again, not to stress it too much, had to pay to be able to access this. So it says on Thursday the 10th, 1753, at Ashley Ferry, a healthy likely cargo of about 360 Negroes, just imported from the ship Pearl. Sorry, that's hidden just a bit. They came directly from Angola. See, this is what, as painful as it is to look at this little advert is actually packed with loads of genealogical information. Great care has been taken and should continue to be taken to keep them free from the smallpox because they had a previous ship where they lost 150 Africans to smallpox who got thrown overboard, which really upsets because I realize if anyone's never going to have a name, all of those millions of Africans who got thrown overboard, we're never going to know who they were.
Right.
Ever.
Right.
Just never. And Deezy, if you can do image number 3. So this is kind of carrying the story on to the kind of next chapter. Remember I said, you're an African in the bottom of a ship, you don't have a name, you don't have an identifier. Something like this, which is actually part of Colonel Thomas Middleton's Plantation Day book, actually gave lists of his enslaved people. The ones in the red are ones that I know of already. 3 of them, I'm fairly confident, were first-generation Africans. I've already connected them to people who were actually sold during the weeping time. So some of this work has already been done. But again, this was another web service that required a fee. Mm-hmm. And Deezy, if we can do image number 4. He's just zapped out, but we'll show it to you really quickly. 4. Mm-hmm. And then I just have one more after this. Okay, so this is me and Martine slowly compiling all the information that we found on Ancestry.com, which is another fee, to be able to share this publicly with descendants of these people and people who are researching this specific group of people. So, you see things like, basically this is using the Beyond Kin methodology. I created a fake kind of spouse label called EP sold during the weeping time with information about that weeping time. And then there's just a huge list. There's literally 440 people on that list. And I always make notations so people can see and who's been researched and who hasn't. So that's taking it to the next level. So that kind of brings me to a close to the weeping time. So I think I've rattled off, that was about 5 or 6 different databases and resources that had to be paid for. And this last one, which I get to chat about with Dania, is the Moses Williams Project. You want to talk a little bit about that?
No. know. Well, I mean, you guys know about Moses, but Moses Williams is the man that did 45, had 45 children with two different women, and he lived to be 115 years old. We were actually just talking about him. And basically, the project with him is connected to our Sheila Hightower Allen DNA project, where we are actually working with Howard University to build a DNA-based tree and find his 45 children in the meantime. We have a group on Facebook that is, and I have a lot of people that's trying to join it. I need you to understand, we only add people who are confirmed to the Calling All Branches Facebook page. Those are confirmed family members. So we have about 1,500 in there right now that are all confirmed. And when I tell you guys that in one way or another, they are all connected to Moses Williams, they are all connected to Moses Williams. And they are representatives of their larger families. Know that. So we're sitting here, what you're looking at, when we started the Moses Williams project, we couldn't do it in the regular way that you do genealogy. You literally had to go back to the beginning. You had to take it back to what you see in front of you. So basically, Brian had to write it out. He was the one, we put Brian in the lead of it because I didn't want to do it. So Brian was placed in the lead of it, and in placing him in the lead, he literally did his paper version of the Beyond Kin project, the Beyond Kin, process. And he wrote it down, and he took down deeds, and he, said who was owning them at this time and who went to who at that time. So that's what one of these sheets that you're seeing. And Daniel Williams ends up being Moses's father.
Yes.
And Moses, if you look at on the corner where it says 1795 Newbury, South Carolina deed, Samuel Henderson to James Waldrop, that Moses, is that the 1791 Moses, or is that 1789 Moses right there?
That's the junior.
That's junior.
That's junior.
That's my third great grandfather. He was born at that time. So when we were looking at these different things, we started to see our families in ways that we didn't know. And one thing led to another, and we started going forward. And then my Sheila died, and I'm sorry, I call her my Sheila, even though she belongs to us all, but she's personally mine. And my Sheila left me, and so we changed the name. And Sheila was an educator, and it just hit me, okay, Danya, let's find a school. And I tell you guys, within minutes of me sending my email out to Howard University, their professor responded immediately on a Sunday. Like, it was in minutes. So that's where we are as far as that is concerned.
So on something like this, just to explain it a little bit, what we did is we actually tracked the enslavement of Africans within the Williams family, who we are biologically related to, starting with the first enslaver, who was actually the first of the Williams family to arrive here. So that's with the generation 3. Is that already we're at this, just showing that we're at generation 3 within the Williams family, which is Daniel Williams II. So we found all of these deeds. So I try to put as much information on this sheet as I could. So there's the years, 1795 Newbury deeds, all the Williams family members that were involved, and then all the enslaved people. So we have Jack. The numbers in parentheses were their ages. The Williams actually gave them, they gave the year of birth, or they gave their age. So we knew the age of the person that we were dealing with.
Which was awesome.
Which is rare and awesome.
Yeah, because, again, we know that Moses was 115 years old when he died. Like, that is definite because of this paper. Moses' 7 was born. This paper gave us his age, and this was done, I think he was 22 on this paper.
That's how we worked out that there were two different Moses.
And that's how we worked out that, yeah.
Yeah.
No, we worked out the two different Moses because you found his obituary first.
Oh, that's true, but this proved it.
Right. This just doubled down on it. But you found his obituary because I found the article about this Moses having 45 kids. Me thinking that it was my third great grandfather, and even then I was saying I wasn't going to do it. But we were going through it, and then Brian turns around and finds the obituary. He had an obituary, guys. This is how important this man was. Even the enslavers knew the importance of him because he was around he was born in 1769. We're talking American Revolution life, y'all. This man saw every war you can think of because he died in 1884. So he saw every phenomenal war that was written in history books. He lived through them all. He saw pants being changed, the pantaloons being changed to pantaloons. He saw the change in money. Oh my God, this man saw everything. He saw everything.
And then that little number at these superscript numbers, again, sticking with Jack in the upper left-hand side, you'll see a little 2. That was my attempt to keep track of these people as I was going from sheet of paper to sheet of paper. And I think I gave up after about 25 sheets. Sure. Because I figured there was no way on earth that a team of about, I think it was 8 or 9 of us at that point, there was no way that 8 or 9 people were going to be able to follow this from page to page. So bless you beyond kin to talk about the right solution to solve the right problem. It just hit it just came on my radar at just the perfect time. I'm like, okay, this is how I can get all these people on there. So I'm gonna say that at least with researching Moses, it didn't really cost anything. No.
Because we were able to find stuff. And another reason why it didn't cost is because Edgefield, I'm giving you the props. You guys are great.
Actually, most of this came from North Carolina.
That was North Carolina deeds?
These were North Carolina deeds.
Oh, wow. But then we ended up in Edgefield and it just it carried over. And again, Edgefield is great. They protected that area. That's that spirit. That's that spirit in them. And they protected that area. Their courthouse wasn't burned. Their city wasn't burned.
Nope.
They did not play those games. And
so now that we've given you some context with 2 working examples, I'm going to say personally, and this isn't bragging rights or anything, I've been researching my family for over 20 years, and I estimate that I've probably spent about $45,000 in 20 years doing research. So that's subscriptions, that's memberships, that's paying access to either digitize or access digitized materials. God only knows how many books.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I just finished buying The Adventures of Person, which is like if you have European colonial Virginia genealogy, that's like the Virginia Bible. They ain't cheap. The cheapest you can get that book secondhand is about $350.
No, I mean the cheapest books that we've purchased are running anywhere from $40 to $50. Mm-hmm.
But again, keeping with the weeping time, a lot of the materials that I need to access, and there's boxes and boxes and boxes of them, they're held in the Philadelphia Historical Society. They're not in a position to digitize anything.
Right.
Apparently, it's a very interesting kind of setup that they have. So again, I'm going to have to go to Philadelphia myself, travel, food, hotel, the lot. Plus, they charge $30 a day.
Right.
To even walk through
the door.
To walk through the door.
So this all boils down to the bottom line. Do you feel that those who know that they are descendants of enslaved people, should they pay? Is this another form of what Carolyn calls genealogical, reparational genealogy? Is this another form of it? Do you think that it should be done? I'm at that point where I'm like, yeah, I think it is. Because genealogy can be very, very expensive. Mm. And you don't even think, and it's even, you got your hobbies, and hobbies have their expenses and things of that nature. But this is more than a hobby. And I'm not saying that it's more than a hobby. We all know it's more than a hobby for us. We want to teach it. We want you guys to do it. We want people to be involved in it. But I'm talking about even for those that's doing it just to find out information about your own little family. If you're just trying to find just this little small part and you can't, and you have to pay for it, it becomes utterly expensive.
Which I agree. I just wish people would understand the differences in different kinds of genealogy. Because I have poor European ancestors, all the way in the Appalachians, early settlers of Tennessee and Kentucky, and I know how hard it is to trace them. But they had names. They did leave footprints. Those footprints may be partial, they may be really hard to find, but their identities and their presence wasn't erased
Right.
or hidden like enslaved Africans were.
Right.
I can't even put parity with my free people of color and enslaved Africans.
Right.
Free people of color also had their names, also left, again, partial to full footprints. Enslaved footprints, like I said,
None.
because the system of slavery was built to strip slaves of their identity.
Right. DZ, we're finished with that. But yeah, I mean, so what you guys are like really responding. You jumped in, and Brandy, I so appreciate you because I saw what you said, and yeah, it is that. I think you know what I'm talking about because I can't say it. So y'all just read through and look at what Brandy said. But Brandy covers me. That's my girl. Like, I love her. So she covered what I had, what I was feeling. She was covering my feelings. And give us your thoughts. Let us know, if you think, how do you feel about it? And I want you to be honest, because that's one thing about Brian and I. We accept it all. If you feel like, well, no, I don't think they should be free. I mean, I think you should have to pay for it. Well, then tell us, and tell us why you feel that way. And because that's what we're trying to do. This is an open dialogue. We do not argue with your opinion. That's your opinion. We give you our side of it, but we don't argue with your opinion. No, nobody have time for that. So please do that.
Plus, I mean, I've always had the feeling that we advocate for our ancestors who couldn't advocate for themselves, who didn't have a voice, who weren't given a voice to advocate for themselves.
Yes, definitely.
I guess the flip side of the conversation as well is I wish that the major commercial family tree sites would engage. Would engage with African American genealogical researchers for their platforms. I think it is a sin and a shame because our ancestry, no matter what ancestry you have, reflects history as it was.
Yes,
Not
right.
as we want it to be, not like we pretend that it is, not that we wish it could have been. Our ancestry is history. And the fact that you don't have an option to add someone to your tree as an enslaver, I think is wrong.
Yeah, Marie said, I think it's like paying for something that's already yours. And that's true. Especially when you see people selling slave deeds and slave records on eBay. Like that is a deep thing. I don't even look at eBay because of that, because it scares me. That's something, if I ever had to say something and made me angry, that was what made me angry, because like I said earlier in the show, you're literally re-auctioning these people off. And you may not even be thinking that you're doing that. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to do that because that's who I am. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. If you see a deed that you know, and it has all these names on it, and you know that it's a slave record, and you're like, oh, I can get some money for this. That's your first thought. That's what it is, because you got to realize that that's the mindset of today, making that cash, making that paper. So that's the mindset of the day. And with that being said, they're going to sit there and they're like, oh, I can sell this off. But you're not even looking at the fact that there's somebody's family.
And that could be the only proof
And
that
that could
someone
be the
has
only-
to prove a family relationship.
Right. So there was something that popped up. You know how Facebook does the reminders of that year or whatever the case is, what you've done for that day, what happened on that day. There was something that popped up on my Facebook page that everybody was watching it. All the genealogists were watching it. It was one of the shows that Henry Louis Gates did. And in the show, he stated that the head of a house in the 1870 was the person that was supposed to receive the 40 acres and a mule.
Right.
That was my great-great-grandmother. And it blew my mind to know that. So because he made that comment and because he could prove that, and I can prove that I am the descendant of Martha Brooks.
Mm-hmm.
Guess who's supposed to have 40 acres and a mule? Y'all looking at her. I'm supposed to have 40 acres and a mule because my great great grandmother was supposed to get it. And I know she's my great great grandmother. I have complete and total proof of it. Families who are connected. I've found her children. I'm slowly finding her children. We all supposed to have it.
Now, imagine Moses' final years. Imagine in 1870. I can't work. My mental math it's horrible. I can't think. He would have been an old man. But can you imagine in 1870, after everything he lived through, he got his 40 acres and a mule?
But did he?
He didn't.
Right. That's the thing. I mean, he was 115 and he was 99 years old in 1870. I can get that math because the man he stays in my life, but he was 99, and he did not get his. It's crazy. Stacey L. She says, I think they should be free. Sometimes the research is expensive travel, free lodging, etc. We need access to our ancestors. They are ours. So yeah, but I would. You know what? So far, I've heard from black people. I need some white people to come in on it. I'm just gonna keep it real. Y'all know me. Y'all know me. I'm gonna keep it real. I want some white people to chime in. I want to know how you feel about the possibility of something like this being free again, only to those who know that they are descendants of enslaved ancestors. Only to them. We're not talking about free people of color. Because we have one, Rebecca Bug, and we can trace her all the way back to Virginia without any issue.
Actually, we have two. We have Martha Bottom as well.
And then you got Martha Bottoms. All the way back to where they came. We know that their mom, who their mother is. Because to be a free person of color, your mother has to be a white woman. Right? Right. So we know that.
And again, the other difference between, say, a poor European white family and an enslaved African family is who holds your records.
Right.
So even if you're poor, you still have to pay tax. So you pay your tax to, your local county representative. There's that kind of a footprint. The only way we can research and trace enslaved people is through the people who held them. So we have, there is no. Thankfully, people have donated things to archives and repositories, and records have come to light. But let's be honest. I mean, that's probably only a fraction of all the slavery-related records that were ever kind of done, written, or stored, or whatever. So we're always in a position of, if it's in private hands, having to kind of ask and beg. But again, me even writing to a state archive or a specialist repository, I always explain how I'm related to either the person or the people that I'm researching.
Exactly.
And I just get these kind of real cognitive dissonant kind of responses back.
Always.
Like, oh, it's going to cost, this is $250. You're just casually telling me something's $250 for me to access stuff that is not in the public domain, that can never be in the public domain because it wasn't a state or county gathered record.
Connie Rouse on our African American Genealogy Forum page, she says, I've paid for Ancestry since 2009, and I found a lot. I found lost relatives from all over the country. I found my slaveholders from Mississippi and South Carolina. I don't think we should have to pay for these documents. I'm still researching a lot. I found my slaveholders that went back to 1600. Now, she brought up something that I didn't even think about.
What's that?
Paying for Ancestry.
Mm.
I never even thought about that. Should I be paying for Ancestry? I mean, at some point, you have to figure out where the line is going to be crossed. Because had I not paid for Ancestry, I wouldn't have found out that I was Martha's child, that I was her descendant. So I had to pay for that. But then once I find out, do I get grandfathered in? Or, where do you draw the line of what you pay and what you don't pay? Or,
something for them to work through.
Right.
Because again, being the devil's advocate, I get why there's a fee. There's a, whether it's a service like Ancestry, whether it's a repository or a specialist collection, they had to license those materials. Sometimes they had to buy those materials. So I mean, they have to keep them, they have to store them, they have to make sure that they're preserved. So I appreciate that there's an expense. However, maybe it's a matter of if you can prove your relationship to the group of people that they hold records for, instead of maybe charging a full whack, charge half or less.
Yeah, I mean, something has to. I agree. I think something definitely needs to be done. But again, that goes back. Everything that we're talking about goes right back into something that they don't want to do in any way, which is give any type of reparations to African Americans. They just don't want to do it. This is another form of reparations, whether we want to look at it like that
Yep.
or not. That's what this is. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm doing my thing. I'm doing my due diligence. I'm doing the same thing as any other person. And let me just be clear. This is not just about African Americans, because you have Native Americans who you can't find stuff. Because I know that I have a Native American ancestor. But I can't get into my Native American ancestor because I don't know enough history about him. And I can't find enough history about him because they don't want to share it with me. They meaning the Native Americans that I know that I connect to. So with that being said, I'm in a catch-22 with that particular position, and I can't go further with it. It literally stops you. You have so many people like Chief, who was on our first show. He'll tell you black people were Native Americans. That's what he says. But they're not listed as that because they were dark. They're not listed as natives. So when you go and you get your DNA, you're simply African. That's it. But then you got all these other little DNA parts that's coming in, like the Asian and the Indian and what is that? You mean to tell me that 30% of me is all across the other side of the pond? Come on now. That can't, I mean, who are these people and how is that possible? I'm really confused about mine. So yeah, Karen responded. Karen said, Ancestry and other online groups are helpful, but it is irritating that there is a fee on documents that taxpayers paid to have organized. So just that situation where we pay again is a bit irritating. But I get why. As for slaveholding records being treated differently, they are also historical records, which to me is good enough reason to make them free. Thank you, Karen, for responding. And making your stake on it and explaining why you feel the way that you feel. And you feel like we do. But again, there's so much. It's not just Africans that have that problem, that actually has that problem. There are others. So should it be free to them as well? And I'm saying, yeah. If they're having that kind of issue, yes. If you're not having that kind of issue, no.
Yeah.
Point blank. It's really that simple. But of course, it's a reparation. It's a payback. And if you do a reparation, if you acknowledge a payback, that means you admit something happened. And that's something that they don't want to do.
But that's why I spent 5 minutes at the top of the show with the kind of housekeeping thing, because there will be people if say historically discriminated against people are perceived to be getting freebies. Oh well, why do they get freebies?
Right.
Why can I have a freebie? They don't take the time to understand kind of the reasoning or the possible rationale behind why we're talking about why descendants of slaves shouldn't have to pay full whack or pay for records.
Right. Right.
They just won't get it.
No, I don't. Brandy, you ain't saying what I need you to say. I mean, it's not. I don't think that they don't get it. I think they don't want to get it. It's blinders. It's those blinders. You know those blinders that horses wear?
Mm-hmm.
So you just can't see, and it keeps you focused on whatever's in front of you. This kind of history is hurtful. It's painful. It's strong. A lot of people don't want to see it.
Yeah.
So they want to stay right there. They want to keep it there.
You raise a good point with that comment. The top of the show, just because I was speaking very calmly about slave auctions, slave ships, 350 Africans being on the bottom of the ship, don't think for an instance I don't feel a kind of way about that.
That's right.
Because I do. But, doing this kind of research, you have to put your big boy and your big girl pants on
All
and
day
just
long.
get your head down and you do the work.
You got to work
When you
on
finish the work, then you can get into your feelings and feel how you want to feel. But at this stage, the work is too important.
Yeah,
But-
I mean, some days you get numb. You know, like that day, and this happens to be a memory that pops up every year on my Facebook page. It's the memory of the little black babies. It's a flyer, and they are trying to get their alligator shoes and their alligator belts. So what they did was they would sit little black babies out there, and the black babies were the bait, and they would go and that's how they get to kill their alligators. In the meantime, my cousins and my ancestors and my family is being killed. Because I have to look at it like that, because y'all need to understand my great-great-grandmother had more than 9 children. I don't know how many she had because she was a breeder. So that actually could have been a picture of one of her children, one of my great-great aunts and uncles sitting in that daggone marsh while this alligator is lurking behind it, and then somebody else is behind the alligator because they want some because they want some boots. Say it, Brandy. Because they want some boots or a belt or something. But yeah, that was something I literally had to cut my computer off that day. I had to cut it off because that was way too much for me. That was over the top, and you gotta. There has to be a point or a time where you have to breathe and just step away. The book House of Bondage.
Oh, yes.
The story of the man that was strapped down, and they beat him so badly that his eyeball popped out. I'm gonna say that again. His eyeball popped out. The man passed out. They threw salt water on him, and his eyeball popped out. I closed the book. I was done. So there just is moments that we deal with in doing this type of research that you have to just stop and say, okay, I'm done for the day, and just let it go.
Just like those 31 or 32 shipments of enslaved Africans that from Middleton and Brailsford, we know we have at least one ancestor that was in the bottom of one of those ships.
Yeah. It's no doubt in it. There's absolutely no doubt in it because we come from a very large group of people, and we know that we have several enslaved family members, and we also know that we not only do we have several enslaved family members, we have several enslaved family members who were breeders. We have a lot, y'all. And I'm talking about just with me and Brian. I'm quite sure that there are several hundreds of African Americans out there that have that as well. So we need to,
Well, especially you think about children who were sold at a really young age, and we're talking like under 1 or
Right.
under 2 years old.
right?
They're taken from their family. They have no idea who they are.
They
and
have no idea.
Their enslaver's not going to tell them who they are or where they came from.
That's right.
So if you're trying to research that kind of an ancestor, the only way you can figure it out is if that deed still exists.
If the deed still
And if it's
exists,
still available.
if it's still available, and then you add DNA on the process on the top of it, because that's what we ended up doing. That's how we know for a fact that we are actual descendants of. Is his name John the Wealthy Welshman?
Yes.
John the Wealthy Welshman Williams. That's who our 7th great grandfather is. We know it for a fact because we are descendants of them. So if anybody from Ancestry.com is listening in, you guys need to contact us. Seriously, I'm just putting it out there.
Do you know how many times I've tweeted them? I said, listen, even if you don't want to have Genealogy Adventures as a consultant, you've got Robin Foster, you've got people like Shelley Murphy, Bernice Bennett. Andre Kern,
Melvin Collier,
Shannon Christmas. There are so many up and coming or established Black genealogists.
LaBrenda Garrett. I mean, it's so many. They are out there and they are working and they're doing it, and you guys are like just really ignoring them. Like this is a type. It's crazy. So I think I'm getting in my feelings a little bit.
I can tell.
I think I am. Okay, I'm gonna shut up. I'm gonna be quiet.
Like I said, I'm being very calm, but I'm very passionate about this because without wanting to keep repeating myself, we advocate for those who literally can't advocate for themselves.
That's right.
And I think we have about 90 seconds left.
Yeah, we do.
So in our last 90 seconds, please, again, if you have a comment or a question or an opinion, feel free to post it.
Yes, and if we can't get to it here, we will definitely come back. You know, guys, we always like coming back and talking to you guys. Callie Mayat, I hope I pronounced your name right. Mayat. A lot of what's on Ancestry is available for free on Family Search. You just have to know how to search the unindexed records because they're a little tricky to find. That's true, but the thing about Family Search is that if you want to actually see the original document, you have to be on Ancestry. That's the thing about that. You can't see the original document through, at least I haven't seen it.
Some of them you can. Some of them you can.
Right, some, but the majority of them are on Ancestry.
But I think one difference, I haven't looked for it for a long time on Family Search, the Edgefield Slave Deed book. That's on Ancestry.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I know it's on Ancestry. But it's not on Family Search.
But I don't think it's on Family Search.
Right. And that's the thing. You have all these things that are going on with, Family Search is free, and that's a great thing. But the problem with it is the transcription. You have to be able to see the original. Like, for example...
Oh, can I just get in real quick before we go? One thing that we have found on Family Search that was awesome were those Freedmen Bank records and the Freedmen contracts.
The labor contracts. So, yeah, those are great. And those you can definitely see. But, again, as far as the census records, y'all don't really trust the census people, do you? I mean, they wrote what they wanted during that time. Like, I'm gonna tell y'all right now, my great grandmother Lula, she married a senior. She was a Peterson, and they put her and two of her daughters. All of their names were Lula. That is incorrect. It's just incorrect. My grandmother's name was Annie. That's it. But yeah, she's listed as Lula, and so was her sister listed as Lula, and so was her mother listed as Lula. So these things were, the transcription was messed up. So you have to, at some point, be able to see the original document, which means you have to pay.
Mm-hmm. But again, Callie made a really good second point, and I'm going to agree with you, Callie,
Yes.
About the digitized bit. I tend to go through the indexed records on Family Search, the roles, and again, you can't search within those roles. You literally have to go image by image by image, like you're looking at a film strip. I save those for like really horrible, wet, rainy, horrible days, or if it's like blizzardy outside.
Right.
Then I'll sit down with Family Search and I will literally go through them one after the other.
Right.
So that's a really good point.
But we are out of time. Thank you guys for listening. And again, continue to post. Put your, this is the discussion. Genealogy Adventures is always an open discussion with no arguments, no judgment. Please make sure you put your stuff up here, and we will definitely let you guys know what next week's show is. Tomorrow.
Yep, tomorrow.
Tomorrow. We'll let you know tomorrow. And continue to tune in, and thank you so much for following us and joining along.
Enjoy your Sunday, and thank you for spending your time with us.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye. That was kind of overdue.